Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. And today I have such a special guest with me. I'm delighted to welcome Sohee Jun. Sohee, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Meredith. It is a pleasure to be here.
Well, you have done so much in the world of coaching clients and also as a leader. So I want to give my audience a brief introduction to you before we jump into talking about your excellent new book. Sohee is a premier leadership coach for women. She's also a mindset expert, best-selling author, corporate leadership facilitator, TEDx and keynote speaker, and a contributor to Forbes Coaches Council. Sohee's latest book is The Aligned Mindset: Secrets of High-Achieving Women for Navigating Work and Life. And it's the result of her 2 decades of work of high-performing executive women at top companies like Netflix, Fox, and Disney. Sohee shares the secrets of how successful women have created a winning mindset, conquering imposter syndrome, silencing inner critic, and empowering them to prioritize their own version of success. Now, Sohee, I did not mention here your experiences as a leader, and I think that would be a great place to start in talking about your journey to the work you do today as a coach with high-achieving women.
Yeah, Meredith, thank you for taking the time to read that really long bio, first of all. And, I'll start by saying that I coach from lived experience, which is to say that, yes, I've been a leader in corporate settings, and I've had the honor of leading teams, multiple teams, which I definitely believe is an honor when you're able to influence and impact the people that look up to you and look to you for guidance and direction. So it is an honor to have had that experience. And it was pretty early on in my career. I want to say I achieved, I received my Ph.D. in organizational psychology mid-20s and was working in the corporate world all alongside that journey. And I had I was recognized for the work that I was doing internally and received a promotion right around late 20s. And it was managing a team. And, I have to say that I stepped into it with a little bit of hesitancy, not knowing, first time leading, I was like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. And at that time, it felt really scary to admit that. And I think I had a lot of imposter syndrome going into it. It felt at the time to me, my inner critic was really loud, which is why these are the very important topics that I coach the women leaders that I work with around, because I know what it's like to have a really large inner critic play and really shrink the way that I show up. So all that to say, my first time out as a leader was one in which I made a lot of mistakes and tried out a lot of different strategies of trying to lead and set the vision, all with kind of a desire to appear like I knew it all. I was probably, late 20s and leading a team of people at various ages and various years in working. And so I wanted to show that I had the answers. And so that made me afraid to lift my hands to say, hey, I need some support here, develop me and show me what it means to be a leader. So that was my first time out. And, further down on my career, Meredith, I had the opportunity to lead another team. And I'll say that I did it very differently in better ways. I was much more seasoned in work, and this was right around the time that, I left corporate for a little bit to take a little bit of a break. And they called me back and said, hey, this time we want you to lead the organization development team that you were a part of. And this was for a large entertainment company. And I gladly took the opportunity, said yes, because I know that I'll be a different leader and a much more experienced in just the work world and how I wanted to show up as a leader. So yeah, I led a large team and I was much more, I would say, able to, wear different hats and lead situationally, which means that you have to be able to provide different strategies and tactics and show up to meet
Mhm.
the person where they're at in the moment and give them what they need. So it was a much more enjoyable experience leading that time around than the first time I got to lead.
Yeah, it sounds like you didn't have a lot of preparation for your early leadership roles, and I think that's very common. And I think that's a great segue into your book because I think your book is so valuable no matter where women are, in particular, in their career journeys. There are so many great lessons and insights to extract, whether you're in your 20s or you're more seasoned. One of the things I loved about the way you structured your book was around a social gathering around a meal.
Mm.
And it just made everything so this will be a funny word to use, so digestible. in in reading your content because of the way you set the table
Mm.
with your framing of this, it helped me relax as a reader and not feel like I'm a student, trying to extract information, but really just sitting around listening to conversations where I can absorb what's being shared. And I know you were very intentional with the way you designed this. Would you talk just a little bit about how you structured that and why?
Yeah, thank you for that feedback, Meredith. And that's exactly the feeling I wanted to provide the reader. What I realized in my own journey is that, the kitchen table is literally one where I felt that I can be who I am in the moment. And it's a different way of connecting. And I wanted to extend that and amplify that in a book that people felt that they can just drop into a conversation with their most trusted colleagues and friends, where they can show up as they are and know that the stories and the experiences that they share will leave wisdom with whoever they're in context with. And, it felt really appropriate for this book because it is built on surveys and stories that were shared with me through the coaching that I've done in over 20 plus years now. And so I did not want this book to be hey, I'm going to tell you. It's all about, hey, drop into a conversation where you're invited and you are seen and you will be heard, and your experience, is not one that is so uniquely like different, that we all have challenges. And it's about how do we share the challenges in service of lifting each other up and connecting through that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that connection is so valuable. The other thing that to me was such a strength in the way you've written your book is there is no one definition. And we'll talk about success in a minute because that what really struck me. But I would love for you to share a little bit about this research in pulling together the surveys that you did and then also the conversations. What were those surveys all about? What were you asking people to respond to? And what were some of the learnings from that you felt were really important, maybe themes to include in the book?
Yeah, this endeavor started out quite different from the, final output and outcome as book writing and the journey of it morphs, as Meredith. It started out as I know it's an instinctual thing. Like, I know that there is something to mindset that I want to pull. And so the first round of surveys that I did to the highly successful women that I got to coach that wanted to participate in the surveys, as well as the colleagues that, I have in my network, it was around the decades of, I have this innate sense that there's different learnings throughout the decades of our lives. So let's start like from a decade perspective. In your 20s, what are those unique challenges? And how do you overcome it? So that was the first kind of iteration, looking at 20s, 30s, 40s. So early career, mid-career, and on into 60s and even 70s, really, which was, something that I felt really passionate about in terms of like there isn't enough research into 50s, 60s, and 70s and how people can really thrive in their career in different ways. So that was the first iteration. And in looking at the responses and, looking at the themes through all of the research, I found that it was about the mindset. It was so loud and clear that there were distinct mindset framings and tools that people were using to navigate the challenges. So then I got even more curious and I said, I'd like to resurvey from a different lens. And I opened up the aperture of the questions from focusing less on the decades and more about mindset and challenges and what keeps you up at night and what would you tell your younger self? What would you tell your self in the future type of questions that were more about, okay, so let's get under the hood and look at the mindset and in particular the tools. And that's how it morphed. Yeah.
Love that. Especially, mindset is one of those terms that's used a lot. And I like the fact that your title talks about aligned mindset. So first, I'd love to get your sense of what do you mean by mindset, and then what's the more narrow view of what an aligned mindset is.
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge the work of Carol Dweck in this space around growth mindset and fixed
Mm.
mindset. She has that book out, and I expand on it to say, share my perspective to answer your question, Meredith. Mindset to me is really defined in terms of how you frame or the stories you tell yourself about a situation or context. So it starts there from understanding, what are you telling yourself about the situation? What are you
Mhm.
telling yourself about how you show up? And then, the aligned mindset is then how do you work with the awareness to create a narrative or framing of a situation to be in support of amplifying you and your strengths in that moment. So I also add in the layer of values, of working with understanding your values. And that's really from the work of my first book, which is about identifying values and your unique definition of success, which success is also a part of this book as well. That's the tie through. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I love your definition of mindset, this idea of framing and also the stories, because we're constantly telling ourselves stories. We just don't always have the awareness of it. We're not conscious of it. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what specific things do you advise clients when it comes to raising their level of awareness so they start noticing the stories they tell themselves or the way that they're framing things. Because I think that, you know, my listeners are people who are interested in growing as individuals. That's my podcast, Grow Strong Leaders.
Yeah.
And so part of growing strong as a leader, a core element of that is this whole self-awareness and becoming more aware. So in that context, I'd love for you to share some of the things you help clients with in raising their awareness.
Yes, I mean, I think there's so many, similarities, and to pull on that thread, Meredith, growing strong leaders starts with awareness to what you said, and it also that is the mindset work. The first step I advise my clients is get curious, because the curiosity piece really invites in this desire to know, right? And that is, I think, the foundation. It's kind of getting under the hood of how do I start knowing? get curious, embrace that notion of like, it's not about judgment about yourself, it's about learning about yourself. So then once you embrace a curiosity mindset, then you can start noticing in each moment or in moments, notice, oh wow, I'm telling a story about, how this person showed up. It even extends to the other person you're in context with. So if you're judging the other person, or if there's a storyline that you're making up about the other person, that is a framing of the situation that really impacts your mindset about that person and situation. So all facets, externally and internally with your own self, just to start with noticing. So once you start noticing, then that allows you to take back power and advocacy and advocate for yourself in a way that supports you in the way that you want to show up. And that's where you start to get more alignment. So when you can work with the knowing of what you're framing or how you're framing, the next step then is, okay, then how can I reframe it so that it's much more supportive of how I want to show up for that person or people that I'm in context with? So, it's what I was saying the other day to someone is that it's so foundational, it's almost basic, and it's those tools that are foundational, basic, that have the most power, as I've seen it in my coaching clients. It's rooting in the foundational stuff that we almost forget to do or neglect.
Mhm. And, as I'm listening to you and you were talking about being able to advocate for yourself and stepping up, that's like another whole area, right? I mean, the becoming aware is like, oh, I didn't realize I was saying yes to so many things, for example, not putting boundaries. All these things we start realizing, and then it hits us, I need to make some changes. So that's a whole other area. And I love your chapter on the self-doubt that creeps in, and the quote that your friend had that you adopted, the 3 words, and I love this: do it afraid. So let's say you've recognized that there's a certain pattern or behavior that's not serving you well, that you want to change, but you know that in doing so, it's going to potentially rattle some cages. So what is someone to do when they're ready to make that shift, but they've been concerned in the past of criticism from others, or, the inner critic jumps in? What idea do you have doing this differently? All those things that can hold us back, that
Yeah.
can create those self-doubts. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, such a great question, Meredith, and it is so applicable to leaders, right? And really everyone. I think that there is that self-talk, which is the aligning piece that is really powerful. So for, some, the do it afraid might really resonate in allowing them to take that micro action forward despite the fear. And what I coach my clients around and the leaders around is, let's not boil the ocean. Let us really take it step by step and do the micro action. And so, what is that? Either mantra or the grounding exercises that will help you feel into that next action. And if it's do it afraid, say that to yourself once you notice that your inner, narrative isn't supportive. So say something, do it afraid, and then move forward, take that micro action forward. And part of this, Meredith, and you probably know this from, working with leaders too, is that you have to test it out. Part of this is like a test it, see what happens, and, are there critics around the action that you took? And then get some feedback. And some of the feedback you integrate, some of it you don't. And that's part of the being mindful and aware as well, right? So it is being able to notice, it is being able to then reframe, and then taking a micro action forward in service of, showing up the way that you want to and in the change that you want to make.
Could you give a couple of examples where you've coached clients, what a micro action might be? What was the challenge they were facing, or the inner turmoil or, talking that they were dealing with? And what was one thing they did that helped them move forward?
Yeah, this is a common one where in an interaction with their supervisor, so this person's a leader and they have a leader that they want to communicate more effectively with. And there was a lot of personalization going on about in their mind, right? They were saying,
Mhm.
oh gosh, it's a personal thing. They're not hearing me. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like I'm being understood, or the person is really challenging what I'm saying. And so, one, it's to become aware, okay, well, what are you telling about yourself? You telling yourself about those interactions, and let's work to depersonalize it. And what do you think is an appropriate micro action to help you move forward to communicate more effectively? Well, okay, so then we unpack the world of possibilities. Okay, well, I can be more direct because this person or this leader is a very direct communicator. Okay, so let's try being more direct. And that strategy is challenging for that person because they don't communicate that way. So it creates a little bit of tension inside to say, oh gosh, now I have to be more direct, and that feels more aggressive or not a style that I'm used to. Well, let's test it out. So building up that courage, doing it afraid, and then that micro action is in that interaction with their leader to be more direct with what they're trying to say. And so this person tried it out, and the next time they came back said, wow, it actually really worked. I felt heard and less challenged in the communication with this person. So I think that's an example that a lot of people can relate to because we're always communicating, and I know most of my clients want to be more effective communicators.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And just as you were talking, and I was thinking about that, do it afraid, it reminds me of a longer phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway. Because
Mm.
that's what I think you're advocating. Even though you feel that fear, you don't allow it to paralyze you or, keep you stuck. You say, okay, it's here and I'm going to walk beside it or work with it or whatever. What would you advise someone in terms of how to think about that fear that they're feeling so they don't hold back and they can take that step forward and perform whatever action it is that's going to be helpful to them?
Yeah, I think it is to acknowledge it because when we try to push it away, or when we try to just like, a lot of people think about just get rid of it or just do it anyway. That is being at odds or just in tension with yourself. So I think the more gentle and compassionate way to be is to acknowledge that you have the fear because it helps dissipate that energy. And guess what? That's also human nature. Many of us, if we're trying to do anything that feels outside of our comfort or norm, will feel a level of fear. And, that's why I wanted to write a book that was inviting people into, hey, these stories are of women that feel fear despite whatever accolades and accomplishments they've had. And they've had quite a few, the head of companies or CHROs in their roles, they've accomplished a lot and they have felt fear and they feel fear. And the tie through is that they acknowledge it and then work with it to what you said earlier, Meredith, it is about working with it and not getting paralyzed in it. So it is about, again, acknowledge it. What is a more supportive framing of, that context? And how do you take a micro action forward that
Mhm.
will give you energy to move forward even further?
You know, I'm enjoying playing with this idea, of the meal and all, because in a way, what you've provided, even though you do have certain things that are served in the course of the meal over time, there's also this element of choice. Just thinking about, your the paella and what kind of toppings you could put on there, depending on your own food preferences, whether it's meat, seafood, vegan, whatever. the beauty of what you've written by pulling on experiences of these various women is it's not a do it this way. It isn't like a straight recipe. It's like a buffet. So this read about these various things that these different women have shared about their own experiences and then pull from that what makes sense for you. What's the right, and best fit for your next step based on your age, your career, where you are in your own journey. And I think that the variations that you provide really enrich the whole experience.
Meredith, thank you for pulling that out. It's a very nuanced part of the book, and I love that you called that out because the tie through, even from the first book to this, is you get to decide. And if you don't decide, that's also a decision. And I want people to lock into knowing that that is a mindset,
Mm-hmm.
critical part of the mindset in being able to advocate for yourself and being able to be the leader that you want to be, show up in the ways that you want to, is to know that in any situation, we have a choice, and our mindset is the first place to go to help us in the ways that we want to move forward and pick the choices that resonate with us. You know, it's interesting because it wasn't until, let me step back and say, as a coach, I get to benefit from the work that I do with others. And I learned so much as well. And it was pretty early on that I locked into this mindset piece, not surprisingly. And once I really started to play with it for myself and see the choices that I have, it really amplifies the power that you feel in a good way in terms of, wow, I can really shape my own day to be, in service of me, or I can be stuck in a really demoralizing energy or mindset. And once I really played with that, that's why I think it's so powerful and why I have the book and the ways that I coach leaders. It's really powerful when you can lock into that you have the choice
Mm.
in how you show up and in the ways that you want to move about the world and the workplace.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to that whole, growth versus fixed. And you
Mhm.
can have that in any given moment. It's, we've always got that choice and we're not stuck. And one of the chapters to me that really illustrates what we're talking about so beautifully is the one on success,
Mhm.
where you asked different people, how they define success, and there were these varying answers. And yet I connected with almost all of them. I could relate to, oh, I can see that. I'm more like this. And but it shows the diversity that's possible. And I think invites us all to ponder, well, what does success mean for me?
Yeah.
And it can vary over time. In fact, I liked your use of the term North Star. And I'd like for you to talk about what did you mean by that and how does that tie in to a person thinking about what is success for them?
So, throughout, as I shared, tying it back to that I coach from lived experience, I know that my definition of success, once I really started to ask myself that, and then let's first acknowledge that that's a really powerful question to ask. It's a big one, and it can be a little overwhelming. And I think it ties to, how it's shifted for me throughout my career and the different seasons of my life. So, for example, early on in my career, and I share this in the book, I really wanted to get the accolades of a promotion and all of the, um, I would say the typical ways that we define success, right? A promotion, a bigger office, a bigger title, more in that way. And this isn't a judgment, it's more just like that is what most people in the corporate world in their early career really look to as anchors for success. And then, once I had kids, that definition didn't seem to fit me anymore. And I felt at odds with that and was at tension with myself. Okay, I have a young one, I have a toddler, I'm pregnant with my third. What does success look like for me? And so I had to re-ask myself that, and it shifted. And it was more than about being present at home and being um, focusing in different areas in a way that I hadn't before in my early career. And so that ties to the North Star in terms of what is my ultimate vision for my career and for my life. And it's based on the values. My ultimate North Star is about, look, I love freedom. It's a value to me, family and connections and experiences. Those are all things that that are deep values for me. And so how does this play out in terms of how I define success in this season of my life? So that's kind of how it all ties together, and it does morph. And I think that if people can honor that, it allows you to be more aligned with, how you want your career to play out.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm a grandmother now, and that's very different than being a mother of young children. Being a grandmother to younger children, it's a whole different experience. And so, our careers can be similar, just in terms of how life evolves, what situations we find ourselves in. But I like the fact of having this North Star anchored in values, because even though you may, excuse me, you may change directions in your career, there are these elements that ground you, that keep you solid in knowing who you are at your core. That's what
Mhm.
I think of it about. And so you can bring any of those elements to whatever situation you're evolving into as a person over time.
Yeah, so recently, I retook the values worksheet that I offer on my website, and it was a useful exercise for me to help me reground on, okay, how have my values shifted at all? It had been probably 10 years since I took that assessment, and it was interesting to see not much has shifted. However, there were other ones that were also at the top. So it made me curious as to, okay, is there a transition or an evolving that I need to honor at this time? So that's where I'm at personally. And I think, leaders and people that are navigating work really need to look at the fluidity of their career and kind of, I don't know, get curious about fluidity. I find that in the workforce, it's almost kind of not something that you want to do. You want to stay to the, traditional markers of success, which I think can feel a little bit more boxed in, make somebody feel more boxed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that freedom again to explore. And I love that you emphasize curiosity, because that's so much more uplifting and freeing than the opposite, which to me is judgment and closed and not open to even asking questions or considering other possibilities. And that's when I think we have our greatest pain, when we don't acknowledge that there are other things we can consider. And I think sometimes people feel trapped in their careers. They have a certain income they need, or family and to support, and there are all these variables that impact and cause them to lose sight of the choices that they have. So I love that your foundational piece is mindset, because it is so much on how we look at the lens through which we're seeing all the things that are happening. One of the other things in your book, just to shift a little bit, but related, is this whole role of mentors, that, the importance of those. And again, I like the variety that you talk about. So it's not like having a single mentor that's going to take you through this phase and then another one after that. Talk a little bit about the way you envision ideally people benefiting from having a mentor or mentors.
Yes, the other phrase I use is mentors and tribe of advocates. So I say tribe because I encourage people to have more than one. It's a lot of pressure to put on one person to,
Mhm.
provide answers and give feedback in holistic ways. So just like in our day-to-day lives where we have friends that we go to for certain things, hey, she's my shopping buddy, or I know so-and-so can be really analytical and provide me really great perspective. If we look around, we have different people in our personal lives that we go to for certain things. And here's the funny thing, if we look to that for one person, then try to build a constellation of people that you go to, right? Because again, it's a lot of pressure, whether it's personal or professional. And so going to the mentors, it's look for people that one have time and energy and that you admire something about their career or the way they show up and engage with them. And just tying that to my own story, when I looked back in my career, I realized I may not have asked for them to be my mentor officially. However, I was going to certain people for advice or career, challenges that I was going through, or, wanting to connect with the senior executive female because they, had the title that I was looking to get at the time, or they had a career experience that I was looking to really learn from. So I think that if you look around in your organization or just in your work life, you'll see that there are people that you can pull in for different things, different advice and different ways of looking at things that I think is powerful than going to one person. And if you just have one, that's okay. It's not a judgment. It's more about how can you broaden your constellation or your tribe to be able to glean from other people that you may not have looked at before in that way.
Mhm. I love that phrase, tribe of advocates.
Mm.
Just because the word advocate is, someone who's going to be in your corner, um, no matter what. And having that level of trust with someone else, I think is so critical. So if someone has thought about this, let's go back to mindset, Sohee.
Yeah.
And it's somebody they think, "Oh, I don't know if I can approach that person, right? And yet they know that individual could really be helpful to them. What's your advice for aligning your mindset so that you feel like you deserve to approach that person, that you are worthy of asking them because of the doubts that can come up? How can someone do it even though they feel afraid?
I love that. So first I'll say that there's a whole page or two on, what to look for when you're looking for a mentor and, some guidance around how to build that relationship. So the readers will find that. And I think one, the aligned mindset is starting with the awareness of like, what are the stories you're telling yourself about connecting with that person? And then reframing it to one of, I'm connecting, I'm curious about that person. And that type of framing, that mindset helps you depressurize the situation because I think many people walk around thinking, oh gosh, it has to be this formal, very structured thing. And, why would they want to make time for me? I'm so, not in their orbit, or I'm in a different part of the organization. All the excuses that we can come up with, right? And if
Yes.
we can, yeah.
Yes. No, I was just thinking that's so true.
Yeah.
Um, we talk ourselves out of things
Yes.
oftentimes, w- and I know I've done this myself over the years. I've worked on it consciously, so I'm much better at it. But the idea of having this conversation inside my head as to why that person would say no before I even ask,
Yes, absolutely. And Meredith, thank you.
and and thinking and projecting into their minds what I think they might be thinking in response when it's all nonsense. It's all made up.
Mhm. Yes. I love that you shared that because so many of my coaching clients do that to themselves.
Yeah,
They are in their heads already coming up with the situation, the scenario, and the end result without even acting on it.
exactly.
which, I've done myself at times. And again, it's to become aware of that and the ways that you limit yourself from getting the thing that you want, the relationship, the mentor, the job, the project that you think is really cool. And can we then notice it and then provide that reframing? Okay, actually, I am just wanting to connect because I'm really curious about their career. So that's a less pressurizing way to look at the situation, going back to how do we, move forward. And then I would say then take an appropriate micro action forward, which is to say, if I were looking to you to be my mentor, Meredith, I would say, Meredith, I really admire what you've done for leaders. I'd love to learn more about your career. Can we meet? And, making an offer like that, I think most people would be really delighted to be invited into that type of conversation because guess what? Humans love to talk about themselves. And um, when you get curious about the person and think of it as a relationship building versus oh gosh, they are a mentor with so much expertise, that's a different framing. It allows you to,
Absolutely.
allows you
Yeah,
to, Mhm,
that's a great example of how to reframe something so that it doesn't feel so intimidating and
mhm.
it actually is something you can see yourself doing. Sophie, we could talk so much longer. There are so many other wonderful things in your book. I want to highly recommend that my listeners who are interested in up-leveling their own mindset get your book, The Aligned Mindset. There's so much richness there. The diversity of ideas, along with just it's very well written, and it's so full of practical ideas and excellent questions that will help people think through what is success to them and how can they live their lives so that they feel happier, more fulfilled, because I know ultimately that's what we all want. And you just do an excellent job with that. So I commend you and thank you for writing this book and would love for you to share how can people connect with you, learn more about your work, and of course, get a copy of your book.
Oh, thank you so much, Meredith. I am most active on LinkedIn, so people can find me on LinkedIn. And if they want a response, then come to my website. I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes. So my website, LinkedIn, and I'm also on Instagram if people follow Instagram. Yeah.
Mhm. And of course, I'm sure your book is on Amazon. And
It is.
before we close, I want to also thank Maya Huchan, our good friend, because I learned about you in your book because she posted about it. And I was so intrigued in a LinkedIn post that I reached out to you and connected, and we just had a fabulous conversation. And I've enjoyed building our relationship in this way. And just want to thank you so much and acknowledge you for the great work that you're doing in the world to help women understand the power and the choices they have in
Mm.
creating lives that are so fulfilling. So thank you so much, Sohee, for being with me.
Oh, you're welcome, Meredith, and thank you for the work that you do with leaders.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.